The war against the Visori Collective was not a war of glorious battles and heroic last stands. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. For 3 generations, humanity had been retreating, ceding star systems one by one to the relentless insectoid advance. The United Terran Confederacy, once a beacon of expansion and discovery, was now a flickering candle in the cosmic dark, its light shrinking with every passing cycle. The Visori, a hive-minded species of chitinous warriors, were patient, methodical, and utterly without mercy. They didn't conquer in the traditional sense. They consumed. Planets were not just occupied, they were repurposed. Their ecosystems systematically dismantled and reconfigured to suit the collective's alien biology. They stripped worlds of their resources, their atmospheres, and ultimately would find their life, leaving behind sterile, gray husks as monuments to their passage. Humanity fought back. Of course, they had to. The early days of the war had seen grand fleets clash in the void, the brilliant lances of energy weapons and the silent, blossoming fire of shattered dreadnoughts, painting ephemeral constellations of destruction. But the Confederacy's ships, marvels of engineering though they were outnumbered and outmatched. The Visori bred soldiers and ships at an astonishing rate, their biomechanical vessels swarming through Terran defenses like a plague of locusts. Now, in the 78th year of the conflict, there were no more grand fleets. What remained of the Terran Navy was a scattered collection of strike groups and lone patrols, fighting a guerrilla war of hit-and-run raids and desperate holding actions. They were ghosts in their own territory, haunting the fringes of systems that had once been their home. On the outer edge of the Kepler-186 system, aboard the aging Confederacy destroyer Stardust Drifter, Lieutenant Kalen Vance stared into the swirling vortex of the jump gate, his reflection a pale, hollow-eyed ghost in the reinforced plasteel of the bridge's main view screen. The gate, a colossal ring of shimmering energy, was humanity's last great technological advantage, a relic of a more hopeful era that allowed for faster-than-light travel across vast distances. But even the gates were failing. The Visori, in their slow, inexorable advance, had begun to target the gate network, severing the arteries of the Confederacy and isolating the remaining human worlds. Kepler 186 Sif, or Haven, as its inhabitants had called it, was one of the last bastions of Terran civilization in this sector, a verdant, Earth-like world that had been a symbol of humanity's resilience. Now, it was a tomb. The Stardust Drifter had arrived too late, the jump gate depositing them into a graveyard of shattered ships and orbital debris. The planet below was a canvas of gray and black, the vibrant greens and blues of its continents and oceans obscured by a thick, choking dust cloud of pulverized cities and incinerated forests. The Visori had been thorough. Kalen's jaw tightened, a familiar knot of anger and helplessness twisting in his gut. He had seen this too many times before. He was a child of the war, born on a frontier colony that had been one of the first to fall. He had spent his entire life running, fighting, and watching worlds die. The Visori were not just an enemy. They were a force of nature, a relentless storm that was slowly eroding the shores of human existence. He had joined the Navy with dreams of turning the tide, of being the hero who would lead humanity to victory. But the war had a way of grinding down dreams into a fine, bitter powder. Now, all he had left was a grim sense of duty and a deep, abiding hatred for the things that had stolen his past and were systematically erasing his future. Anything on long-range scanners. Anya, Kalen's voice was rough, a low rasp that spoke of too little sleep and too much caffeine. His first officer, Anya Sharma, A woman whose calm demeanor was a stark contrast to his own barely contained fury, shook her head, her dark eyes fixed on her console. "Nothing, Kay. The system is dead. The Visori fleet jumped out 3 days ago, according to the last distress call from the planetary governor. They left a few orbital sentries, but they're automated and easily avoided." Kalen nodded, his gaze drifting back to the dead world below. "They won't be back. They've taken what they wanted. Now they'll move on to the next system. And the next." He ran a hand through his cropped, black hair, the gesture weary and automatic. The Stardust Drifter was on a reconnaissance mission, a lonely and thankless task of charting the Visori's advance and searching for any signs of weakness, any chink in their chitinous armor. It was a fool's errand. He knew. The Visori had no weaknesses. They were a monolith, a singular will driving an uncountable number of bodies. They didn't have politics or factions or internal squabbles. They simply were. And they were winning. "Set a course for the asteroid belt on the system's edge," Kalen ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "We'll run a deep scan for any Visori stragglers or listening posts. Command wants a full report on their movements." Anya nodded, her fingers dancing across her console as she relayed his orders to the helm. The Stardust Drifter, a vessel that had seen better days, its hull scarred with the plasma burns of 100 skirmishes, slowly turned its nose away from the dead world and began its silent journey into the darkness. For 3 days, they drifted through the asteroid belt, a vast, silent expanse of rock and ice. The ship's passive sensors swept the void, searching for the telltale energy signatures of Visori technology. It was a tedious, nerve-wracking process. The Visori were masters of stealth, their ships often lying dormant for weeks, indistinguishable from the cold, inert rock around them. But the belt was clean. The Visori had moved on, their attention already focused on their next target. On the 4th day, just as they were preparing to jump to the next system, a faint, anomalous signal pinged on Anya's console. It was weak, almost lost in the background radiation of the system's star, but it was there, and it was not Visori. "Kalen, you need to see this," Anya said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. Kalen was by her side in an instant, his eyes scanning the data stream on her screen. The signal was a repeating pattern, a complex mathematical sequence that was a hallmark of Terran technology. But it wasn't a standard Confederacy distress call or a military encryption. It was something else entirely, something old and unfamiliar. "Where is it coming from?" Kalen asked, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. Anya pointed to a small, unremarkable asteroid on the main view screen. "There. Sector Gamma 7. The signal is originating from inside that rock." Kalen frowned. An asteroid. It made no sense. There were no Confederacy outposts in this system, no hidden bases or listening posts. The Confederacy had long since abandoned this sector to the Visori. "It could be a trap," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "The Visori are not known for their subtlety, but they are not fools. I've run every diagnostic I can think of," Anya countered, her gaze unwavering. "The signal is definitely human. Pre-war, by the looks of it. The encryption is ancient, something I've only seen in historical archives." Kalen hesitated, his mind racing through the possibilities. A pre-war signal. That meant it had been broadcasting for at least 78 years. A ghost in the machine crying out from a forgotten era. It was almost certainly nothing. A malfunctioning probe or a derelict ship's beacon on its last legs. But what if it wasn't? What if it was something more in a war they were so catastrophically losing? Any anomaly, Any deviation from the predictable, brutal script of defeat was a glimmer of hope, however faint. "Take us in." Slowly and quietly, Kalen said, his decision made. "Full sensor sweep. I want to know what's in that rock before we get within spitting distance." The Stardust Drifter altered its course, its engines running at a bare minimum to reduce its energy signature. As they drew closer to the asteroid, the ship's sensors began to paint a more detailed picture of its interior. It was not a solid chunk of rock. The asteroid was a hollowed-out shell, a camouflaged hangar concealing a vessel of unknown design. The ship was not large, barely the size of a frigate, and its energy readings were off the charts. It was powered by a source that the Stardust Drifter's computers could not identify, a technology that was far beyond anything the Confederacy had ever produced. "That's impossible," Anya breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The power core on that thing is generating more energy than a star. It's beautiful." Kalen didn't share her sense of wonder. His mind was filled with a cold, calculating dread. A ship of unknown design, with a power source that defied the laws of physics, hidden inside an asteroid in a dead system. This was not a malfunctioning probe. This was something else entirely. "Is it armed?" he asked, his hand instinctively hovering over the ship's alert panel. "I can't tell," Anya admitted. "The energy readings are so overwhelming. They're masking everything else. It's like trying to see a candle in the heart of a sun." As they closed to within 1,000 kilometers of the asteroid, the mysterious signal suddenly changed. The repeating mathematical sequence was replaced by a clear, unencrypted audio transmission. It was a voice, a human voice, speaking in a dialect of English that was archaic and strangely formal. "This is a message for any vessel of the United Terran Confederacy. We are the last remnants of Project Chimera. We have been incommunicado for over a century, but we have monitored your struggle against the Visori. We are aware of your losses. We are aware of your desperation. We can help you. We are transmitting our coordinates. We await your arrival." The message repeated. A calm, measured voice from a bygone era. A voice that spoke of a time before the war. A time when humanity had looked to the stars with hope instead of fear. Kalen stared at the view screen, his mind reeling. Project Chimera. He had never heard of it. It was not in any of the historical records he had ever studied. A secret project. Then, one that had been lost to the fog of war. A century. They had been silent for a century, and now they were offering to help. "It's a trick," he said, his voice a low growl. "It has to be. The Visori have captured a human. They're using them to lure us in." "Or," Anya said, her voice soft but firm, "it's exactly what it sounds like. A miracle." Kalen wanted to believe her. Gods. He wanted to believe her. But the war had taught him that miracles were in short supply. Hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. And yet, what choice did they have? They were losing the war. They were losing it badly. Every day brought fresh new news of another defeat, another world lost, another colony silenced. The Confederacy was dying, and they were all dying with it. This was something new, something different, a variable in an equation that had seemed all but solved. "Take us in," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Let's see what this ghost from the past has to say." The Stardust Drifter glided silently towards the asteroid, its running lights extinguished, its weapon systems powered down. It was a gesture of trust, a leap of faith in a universe that had given them no reason to believe in anything but pain and loss. As they passed through the asteroid's camouflaged hangar doors, they were bathed in a soft, Ethereal light. The ship within was a thing of impossible beauty, its hull a seamless, crystalline structure that seemed to drink in the light and reflect it back in a dazzling array of colors. It was a work of art, a testament to a level of technological mastery that was almost unimaginable. As the Stardust Drifter settled into a docking cradle that extended from the mysterious vessel, a voice echoed through their comm system, the same calm, formal voice from the broadcast. "Welcome, Stardust Drifter. We are the vessel Odyssey, and we have been waiting for you for a very long time." The airlock hissed open, and Kalen, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm, stepped out onto the docking ramp, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He didn't know if he was walking into a trap or a salvation, if he was about to meet the saviors of humanity or its final executioners. But as he looked up at the crystalline ship, at the impossible, beautiful thing that had been waiting for them in the dark, he knew one thing for certain: the war, the long, brutal, agonizing war, had just changed. And he was standing at the epicenter of the change. The future of humanity, for better or for worse, had just begun. The interior of the Odyssey was as breathtaking as its exterior. The corridors were not the cold, utilitarian gray of a Confederacy warship, but a warm, inviting space of polished wood and glowing crystals. The air was clean and fresh, with the faint, pleasant scent of ozone and growing things. It felt less like a ship and more like a sanctuary, a pocket of peace and tranquility in a galaxy consumed by war. Kalen and his small away team, a handful of heavily armed Marines, moved cautiously through the silent corridors, their combat boots a jarring, discordant sound in the otherwise peaceful environment. They were met by a single individual, a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s, with long silver hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. She was dressed in a simple, elegant robe of a material that seemed to shift and shimmer in the soft light. She was unarmed, and she smiled at them, a warm, genuine smile that seemed to momentarily disarm Kalen's ingrained suspicion. "I am Ilara," she said, her voice the same calm, measured tone from the broadcast. "I am the caretaker of the Odyssey." Kalen did not return her smile. "Lieutenant Kalen Vance, of the Confederacy destroyer Stardust Drifter," he said, his voice cold and professional. "You said you could help us. I want to know how." Alara's smile did not falter. "Patience, Lieutenant. All will be explained in due time. But first, you must be hungry. You must be tired. The war has been long and hard for your people." She gestured down a corridor, and Kalen saw a large, open space that looked like a garden, with lush, green plants and a small, bubbling fountain. The sight was so incongruous, so utterly out of place on a spaceship, that for a moment he was at a loss for words. He had not seen a real garden, a place of peace and beauty, since he was a child. The war had a way of turning everything to ash and dust. "We are not here for a social call," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. "We are here for answers." Alara's expression softened, a hint of sadness in her impossibly blue eyes. "The answers you seek are not simple, Lieutenant. They are woven into the very fabric of this ship, into the legacy of Project Chimera. To understand them, you must first understand what we are." She turned and began to walk towards the garden, her movements fluid and graceful. "Follow me," she said, her voice a gentle command, "and I will show you everything." Kalen hesitated for a moment, his gaze shifting to his Marines, who looked as bewildered as he felt. This was not what he had expected. He had expected a military briefing, a strategic plan that says, a new weapon. He had not expected a cryptic woman in a robe and a garden in the middle of a spaceship. But they had come this far. They had taken the leap of faith. And now, they had to see it through. He nodded to his men, and they followed Alara into the garden, their weapons held at a low ready, their eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. They were soldiers in a strange, new world, a world of impossible ships and ancient secrets, and they were about to discover that the war they had been fighting was only a small part of a much larger and much more terrifying conflict. The universe was about to get a whole lot bigger and a whole lot more dangerous, and humanity, the small, desperate, broken race on the brink of extinction, was about to find itself at the very center of the storm. The ghost from the past had a name, and its name was Odyssey, and it was about to change everything, forever. The garden was a symphony of impossibilities, towering. Bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, azure glow on pathways paved with what looked like polished river stones, but felt warm to the touch. Ferns with fronds of spun silver unfurled in the humid air, their tips beaded with shimmering dew. The sound of the fountain wasn't the simple splash of water, but a complex, melodic chiming, as if each droplet were a note in a celestial song. For Kalen, it was an assault on the senses. His world was the recycled air of the Stardust Drifter, the metallic tang of ozone after a phaser discharge, the sterile gray of bulkhead walls. This place, this vibrant explosion of life, felt more alien to him than the vacuum of space. His Marines felt it too. Their rigid, combat-ready stances seemed almost comical in this tranquil oasis. They were warriors in a sanctuary, their armor and pulse rifles a profane intrusion. Alara led them to the center of the garden, where the fountain's water cascaded over a series of crystal tears. She moved with a purpose that belied the setting's serenity, her silver robe trailing behind her like a whisper. "You ask how we can help," she began, her voice resonating with the fountain's chimes. "To answer that, you must first understand what you are fighting. You see the Visori as a destructive force, a plague to be eradicated, and you are not wrong, but they are also life. They are a highly successful, single-minded organism that is simply following its biological imperative to expand, to consume, to replicate. You fight their ships, their soldiers. You fight the symptoms of the infection, not the disease itself." Kalen's patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. "We've had enough philosophical lectures from armchair generals back on Earth to last a lifetime. We are dying out here. We don't need a lesson in alien biology. We need weapons. We need ships. We need something, anything, to throw back at them." Alara turned to him, her sky-blue eyes holding a profound and unnerving depth. There was no anger in her gaze, only a kind of ancient pity that made Kalen's skin crawl. "A weapon is a tool, Lieutenant. A tool can be broken. A tool can be turned against its wielder. What we offer is not a better tool. We offer a better way." She raised a hand towards a patch of moss growing on a nearby rock. As Kalen watched, the moss began to stir, to grow at an accelerated rate, its velvety green tendrils weaving themselves together into a complex, three-dimensional shape. It formed a perfect, intricate replica of the Stardust Drifter. The detail was astonishing, down to the scorch marks on its hull and the faded Confederacy insignia. The Marines gasped, their weapons lowering slightly in sheer disbelief. "The Odyssey is not a machine, Lieutenant Vance." Alara said, her voice soft but carrying an immense weight. It is an organism, a synthesis of organic life and advanced technology. The scientists of Project Chimera did not build a ship. They grew one. This vessel thinks. It feels. It creates. It can manipulate matter at a molecular level. The Visori repurpose worlds. We can create them. Kalen stared at the moss sculpture, his mind struggling to process the implications. A ship that could create. A living vessel. It was the stuff of science fiction, of pre-war fantasy. "Who are you?" Anya Sharma asked, her voice a mixture of awe and trepidation. She had been silent until now. Observing. Analyzing. "Who is the we you keep referring to?" Alara's gaze shifted to Anya, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. "A perceptive question. The we is the crew of the Odyssey, the minds of Project Chimera." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. When the project reached its culmination, its creators, the finest scientific minds of their generation, realized they had created something more than a vessel. They had created a new form of existence. To guide it, to become one with it, they uploaded their consciousnesses into the ship's neural matrix. They are the we. They are the living memory of a time before the fall. They are my family. Kalen felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the garden's cool air. Uploaded consciousnesses, ghosts in the machine. That explained her archaic dialect, her strange detachment. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was a part of it all. "And you," Alara, Kalen pressed, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you one of them? Are you even human?" The smile returned to Alara's face, but this time it was tinged with an undeniable sadness. "I am, and I am not. I was once a person, yes, the lead xenobotanist of the project, but now my consciousness is intertwined with the ship's. I am its voice, its emissary, a bridge between what humanity was and what it could become. In a very real sense, I am the Odyssey, the garden, which had moments before seemed a place of wonder, now felt like a beautiful, terrifying trap." Kalen felt a surge of revulsion. These people, these scientists, had abandoned their bodies, their humanity, to become one with a machine. It was a perversion, an abomination. "So, you've been hiding in this techno-garden for a century while our people have been slaughtered," he spat, the accusation sharp and bitter. "You watched worlds burn from the comfort of your living spaceship and did nothing. We were not hiding. Lieutenant," Alara corrected, her voice losing its gentle edge for the first time, replaced by a steely resolve. "We were growing, evolving. The Odyssey was a prototype, a seed. It needed time to mature, to reach its full potential. To intervene before we were ready would have been to invite our own destruction and to extinguish humanity's last, best hope. We monitored your struggle. Yes, we felt every loss, every world that went dark. We waited for the right moment, for the desperation to outweigh the fear of the unknown. We waited for you." She gestured again. This time, the air in front of them shimmered. A holographic image flickered into existence. A swirling, complex double helix of light. It was beautiful, while Kalen recognized the distinct, jagged patterns of Visori genetic code. "This is the essence of your enemy," Alara explained. "You fight their carapaces, their bioships. You see only the shell. We see the source code. They are a hive mind, connected by a psionic frequency. Their strength, their unity, is also their greatest vulnerability. We can create a counter-frequency, a virus that would not kill them, but would sever their connection to the hive mind. Imagine, Lieutenant, An army of Visori, suddenly individuals, confused, terrified. Their entire civilization would collapse from within, without a single shot fired. Kalen stared at the glowing helix, his military mind immediately grasping the strategic implications. It was brilliant. It was elegant. It was a war-winning strategy. No more attritional warfare. No more trading ships and lives for inches of space. It was a single, decisive stroke that could end the conflict in months, not decades. "You can do that," he breathed, the anger and suspicion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a surge of raw, unadulterated hope. "Why haven't you? What are you waiting for?" "We are waiting for you," Ilara repeated. "As I said, we do not offer a weapon. We offer a partnership. This technology, this power, cannot simply be handed over. It must be understood. It must be wielded with wisdom, not just desperation. The Confederacy is a military organization. It thinks in terms of command structures, of orders, of weapons to be fired. The Odyssey does not respond to commands. It responds to symbiosis. To use what we offer, you must learn to connect with the ship, to become a part of its process. You must be willing to change." There it was, the price, the catch. It wasn't about resources or political concessions. It was something far more fundamental, far more personal. They had to become like her. They had to surrender a part of themselves to this entity. Kalen's mind recoiled from the thought. It sounded too much like what the Visori did, consuming and assimilating. Was trading one hive mind for another truly a victory? He looked at his Marines, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. They were looking to him for guidance, for orders. He was their commander. But in this place, he felt utterly out of his depth. He was a soldier, trained to fight and to die for a cause he understood. He knew how to read a tactical display, how to target a Visori cruiser's weak point. He did not know how to negotiate the salvation of his species with a ghost in a living machine. "We need to confer," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "We need to talk to our superiors." Ilara nodded, a knowing look in her ancient eyes. "Of course. We have waited a century. Lieutenant, we can wait a little longer." She gestured, and the holographic Visori DNA dissolved into motes of light. The moss sculpture of the Stardust Drifter unraveled, returning to its simple, natural state. The garden was once again just a garden, beautiful and serene. But for Kalen, the illusion of peace was shattered. He now saw the immense, terrifying power that lay dormant beneath the surface, a power that could save humanity or fundamentally unmake it. He turned to leave, his boots heavy on the warm stone path. Anya walked beside him, her expression thoughtful, her mind clearly racing. As they reached the airlock that led back to their own ship, Kalen paused and looked back at Ilara, who stood unmoving by the chiming fountain, a solitary, timeless figure in her silver robe. He had come here seeking a weapon, a simple, straightforward tool to kill his enemies. Instead, he had found a crossroads, a choice that would define not just the outcome of the war, but the future of the human race. And the weight of that choice was now settling squarely upon his shoulders. The transmission to Confederacy Command would be the most difficult one he had ever had to compose. How could he possibly explain what he had seen? How could he articulate the nature of the choice before them? He wasn't just bringing back a reconnaissance report. He was bringing back a revelation, a heresy, and a terrifying, beautiful hope that might cost them their very souls. The transition back to the Stardust Drifter was a jarring slap of reality. The airlock hissed shut behind them, sealing off the Odyssey's warm, living scent and replacing it with the familiar and sterile smell of scrubbed air, hot metal, and the faint, ever-present odor of stressed life support systems. The soft, ambient light of the garden gave way to the harsh, utilitarian glow of the destroyer's corridor panels, each one flickering with the unsteady pulse of an aging power conduit. Kalen felt the tension return to his shoulders as if he were putting on a heavy coat. The cold, metallic deck plating clanged under his boots, a stark contrast to the silent, yielding pathways of the Odyssey. This was his world, a world of function over form, of survival over beauty, and stepping back into it felt like waking from a dream he wasn't sure he wanted to have. He immediately convened his senior staff in the cramped briefing room. Anya, his helmsman Jax, the ship's grizzled chief engineer, and Sergeant Rostova, who represented the Marine detachment. The mood was thick with a mixture of awe and deep-seated anxiety. Kalen began, his voice flat and devoid of the turmoil churning within him. "Report. Your impressions." Anya spoke first, her dark eyes alight with an intellectual fire Kalen hadn't seen in years. "It's transcendent. Kalen, the biotechnology alone is centuries ahead of us. A self-repairing, self-replicating vessel. The power source defies our understanding of physics, and the plan, the counter-frequency. Strategically, it's flawless. A silver bullet for a war we've been fighting with blunt instruments." Sergeant Rostova, a woman whose face was a roadmap of scars from battles Kalen had only read about, shifted in her seat. "With all due respect, sir," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rumble. "It sounds too good to be true. Magic ships and ghost scientists offering to end the war. I've seen the Visori turn entire cities into glass. They don't have a weakness that can be sung to sleep. This feels like a trap, a beautiful one, I'll grant you, but a trap nonetheless. And the price," Kalen interjected, his gaze fixed on Anya. "She wasn't offering a weapon. She was offering a merger. Symbiosis, she called it. What does that mean? Do we plug our brains into the wall? Do we give up who we are to become part of the choir in her ghost cathedral?" His voice dripped with scorn, a defense against the hope that was trying to claw its way into his heart. Anya met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe it means learning a new language. K. Maybe it means evolving. We've been trying to fight a forest fire with buckets of water. She's offering to teach us how to make it rain. And frankly, our current way of being who we are is leading us directly to extinction. Perhaps a change is exactly what we need." The argument raged for an hour, a circular debate fueled by desperation and distrust. The science was seductive, the solution elegant, but the implications were terrifying. They were soldiers, sailors, engineers. They understood orders, schematics, and the brutal calculus of war. They did not understand communion with a living starship run by the digitized souls of long-dead scientists. Finally, Kalen slammed his hand on the metal table, the sound echoing the finality in his voice. "Enough. We can't decide this. Command has to. Anya, work with me. We need to draft a message. We'll transmit the raw sensor data from the Odyssey, our full audio-visual logs of the encounter, and a summary. No speculation, no opinions, just the facts. Let the admirals on Earth earn their pay for once." Crafting the message was an exercise in surrealism, how to describe the indescribable in the terse, coded language of a military communique, encountered vessel of unknown origin, designated Odyssey. Vessel claims to be product of pre-war black site. Project Chimera. Vessel is organic, sentient, crewed by integrated consciousnesses of original science team. Primary interface designated Alara. Proposes non-lethal strategic level solution to Visori conflict via genetic frequency manipulation. Offer is conditional upon symbiotic integration of Confederacy personnel with vessel systems. It sounded like the ravings of a madman. They attached the data packets terabytes of sensor readings that would make any Confederacy physicist's head spin and sent the message package on a tight beam transmission aimed at the nearest relay station. A message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean, praying it would find its way home. And then, they waited. The waiting was a unique form of torture. They were adrift in a dead system, docked inside a miracle, their fate hanging on a reply that had to travel light years through hostile territory. Days bled into one another. The crew of the Stardust Drifter grew restless, their conversations dropping to hushed whispers in the mess hall and engine room. They were caught between two alien worlds, the silent, chitinous threat of the Visori that they knew, and the silent, crystalline promise of the Odyssey that they didn't. On the third day of their vigil, things began to change. The flickering light panel in the port corridor, a nuisance Chief Engineer Madsen had been battling for months, suddenly glowed with a steady, unwavering light. The persistent, low-level vibration from the overworked atmospheric scrubbers fell silent. The air in the ship growing noticeably fresher, cleaner. Madsen reported it to Kalen, his face a mask of bewilderment. "It's not us, sir. I've run diagnostics 3 times. Something, or someone, is patching our systems from the outside, polishing the code, rerouting power flows, reinforcing stress points in the frame at a molecular level. The Drifter hasn't run this smoothly since she left the shipyard." Kalen felt a prickle of violation. The Odyssey was reaching into his ship, touching it, changing it, without permission. It was a demonstration, a subtle display of its capabilities, and it was deeply unnerving. The next day, a compartment in their galley, previously filled with tasteless, nutrient-paced ration packs, was suddenly stocked with fresh produce, green vegetables, ripe fruits, things the crew hadn't seen since their last shore leave on a core world years ago. There was no note, no explanation, just a silent, miraculous bounty. It was a gesture of profound kindness, yet it felt like the most sophisticated psychological operation Kalen had ever encountered. Then, Alara appeared, not in person, but as a hologram, shimmering into existence on the bridge of the Stardust Drifter. She stood there, bathed in the glow of their tactical displays, a figure of impossible serenity in their world of cold, hard data. Jax, the helmsman, nearly jumped out of his chair. "We understand your apprehension, Lieutenant Vance," she said, her voice calm and without judgment. "You fear what you do not understand. You believe we are asking you to sacrifice your identity. That is not the case." She raised a holographic hand, and the main view screen changed from its star chart display to a complex, flowing animation of neural networks and energy pathways. The counter-frequency is not a pre-programmed missile to be launched. The Visori hive mind is a psychic storm, constantly shifting, adapting. To navigate it, to deliver the severance code, requires a pilot, a conscious mind that can feel the currents, that can react in real time. It requires an intuitive link, a partnership between a human mind and the Odyssey's vast processing power. It is not a surrender of self. It is an amplification of it. We are not asking you to become a machine. We are offering you the chance to become the pilot of a living world. Her explanation was logical. It made a terrifying kind of sense. But before Kalen could formulate a response, the communications console chirped, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the tension on the bridge. Anya's head snapped towards her screen. "Sir, we have a message. It's from Sector Command. Priority 1. Encrypted." Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. On screen, the text that appeared was short, terse, and colder than the void between stars. Message begins. U.T.C. Directive 734. Asset designated Chimera is classified level Omega. Secure vessel and all associated technology by any means necessary. Isolate primary biological interface. Elara. Maintain position and radio silence. Black Fleet Task Force. Repris. En route. ETA 72 hours. Acknowledge the message ends. Kalen read the message once, then a second time. The words were like ice in his veins. Asset. Secure. Isolate. By any means necessary. They hadn't sent scientists or diplomats. They hadn't asked for clarification. They had sent the Reapers, the Confederacy's most ruthless and secretive special operations fleet, a unit that specialized in making problems and witnesses disappear. Command didn't understand. Or maybe they did, and they had simply decided they would take this power by force. Alara's hologram watched him, her expression unreadable, but her blue eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful understanding, as if she had already seen this message 100 times before in her century of waiting. Kalen looked from the cold, brutal orders on his screen to the ethereal woman who offered a salvation that his superiors wanted to chain and dissect. He was a soldier. His entire life had been defined by the chain of command, by the simple and brutal clarity of following orders. But for the first time, he understood that an order could be a betrayal, not just of a principle, but of survival itself. His hand hovered over the console to send the simple, one-word acknowledgement that would seal their fate. He was trapped between a lifetime of duty and a single, terrifying chance for a future. And the Reapers were coming. The silence on the bridge of the Stardust Drifter was a physical weight, heavier than any hull breach. Every eye was on Kalen, waiting for the simple keystroke that would acknowledge the order, that would set them on an inexorable course of conflict with the very entity that offered their salvation. The holographic image of Elara remained, her serene expression a silent testament to a tragedy she had likely foreseen for decades. She was not a part of their chain of command, not bound by their rules of engagement, yet she seemed to understand the gravity of Kalen's choice more than anyone. Kalen's finger, poised over the console, trembled slightly. He saw his entire life laid out before him, the academy, the oaths he'd sworn, the friends he'd lost fighting for the Confederacy. Duty was the iron spine that had held him together through the horrors of the war. To break that spine now felt like a betrayal of every memory, every fallen comrade. But then he saw the other path. He saw the smoldering ruins of New Athens, the endless list of dead worlds, the slow, grinding extinction of his species. He saw the cold, clinical words on the screen: asset, secure, isolate. Command didn't see salvation. They saw a resource to be plundered, a weapon to be seized and controlled. They would tear the Odyssey apart to learn its secrets, lobotomize it, and in doing so, they would undoubtedly destroy the very thing that made it work. They would kill the last, best hope of humanity out of sheer, blind arrogance. "Anya," Kalen said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Cut our tight beam relay to Sector Command. Now!" Anya's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew across her console. "Relay cut." Sir, we are dark. Sergeant Rostova took a half step forward, her hand dropping to the grip of her pulse rifle. Sir, that is an act of mutiny. You are defying a direct order from a superior officer. Kalen turned, his gaze meeting the hard, unyielding stare of the veteran Marine. Directive 734 is an unlawful order. Sergeant, it demands we engage a non-hostile entity without provocation for the purposes of illegal seizure. More than that, it is a strategically suicidal order that sentences our species to death. My primary duty is to the survival of the Confederacy and its people, not to the folly of a short-sighted admiral half a galaxy away. Our orders were to reconnoiter. I have determined that this vessel represents the single greatest strategic asset in human history, and the Task Force Reaper represents the single greatest threat to that asset. We will act accordingly. He turned back to the shimmering image of Ilara. Can you hide us? A flicker of something not surprise, but perhaps approval crossed her face. The Odyssey does not hide, Lieutenant. It becomes. The asteroid you see is not a shell we are hiding within. It is a part of us, grown around the ship for camouflage. We can do the same for the Stardust Drifter. We can merge you into our chrysalis. Do it, Kalen commanded, and I need you to block any transmissions from leaving this system. When the Reapers arrive, I want them to be as blind as we were. It is already done, Ilara said simply. The deck beneath their feet gave a gentle, almost imperceptible shudder. On the view screen, the image of the asteroid hangar began to change. The crystalline docking cradle that held them retracted, not into the Odyssey, but into the asteroid wall itself. Plasteel and rock flowed like liquid, enveloping the Stardust Drifter, a silent, organic tomb sealing them in. The lights on the bridge dimmed as their external sensors went blind, cocooned in a cage of living rock miles thick. What now, sir? Jax asked from the helm, his voice a nervous tremor. We can't just sit in here and wait for them. No, Kalen agreed. We prepare. Ilara, you said you needed a pilot. You're looking at him. He strode towards the main view screen, towards the hologram, until he was standing face to face with the ghost in the machine. I accept your offer. I will be your partner. Tell me what I need to do. Anya stepped forward, her face etched with concern. Kalen, you don't know what this will do to you. I know what will happen to us if I don't do this. He countered, his gaze never leaving Ilara's. I've been a weapon my whole life. Anya, just a tool pointed and fired by other people. For the first time, I have the chance to be the hand that aims. I'll take that chance. Ilara's form became slightly more solid, her expression imbued with a solemn gravity. This is not a simple procedure, Lieutenant. It is not a simulation you can exit. To connect with the Odyssey is to open your mind to a century of our collective consciousness. You will see the birth of this vessel. You will feel the hopes and fears of its creators as they became one with it. You will experience the long, silent vigil as we watch humanity tear itself apart and then be torn apart by the Visori. It will change you. The man who emerges from this may not be the same man who enters. The man I am now is losing a war, Kalen said, his voice raw. I'm willing to risk a change. He spent the next 2 days in a state that was neither sleep nor wakefulness. He was led by Ilara to the heart of the Odyssey, a chamber that defied geometry, where the walls were woven from pure light and the air hummed with an energy that vibrated in his very bones. There, he was submerged in a translucent, bioluminescent gel that cradled his body, while crystalline filaments, finer than spun silk, made contact with his temples. The symbiosis began not as a jolt, but as a whisper, a single note of music that expanded into a symphony. An ocean of information poured into his mind. He felt the cold ambition of the project's director, the joyful discovery of Alara as she first coaxed a plant to grow in zero-G, the terror and awe of the scientists as they uploaded their minds into the machine they had created. He lived their lives, felt their passions, their regrets. Then came the silence. A century of it. He felt the ship's patient, slow growth. He watched through its external senses as the first Visori scout ships entered Terran space, as the war began, as the first distress calls from burning colonies echoed through the void. He felt the Odyssey's grief, a vast, collective sorrow, and its frustration, its desperate urge to intervene held in check by the cold logic that it was not yet ready. His own memories of his home colony burning, of the faces of his lost crewmates, of the endless giant's brutal retreat merged with this greater, older pain. He was no longer just Kalen Vance, lieutenant in the Terran Confederacy. He was a part of something more. The ship's senses became his. He could feel the spin of every asteroid in the system, the faint gravitational pull of the distant gas giants. He could feel the Stardust Drifter, nestled beside him in the dark, could sense the anxious heartbeats of his crew. He was the pilot. He was the ship. He was the Odyssey. He awoke with a gasp, the filaments retracting from his temples. He was back in the Chamber of Light, but the world felt different, sharper, more vibrant. Alara was there, her hand resting on the edge of his immersion pod. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I feel." Kalen began, searching for the words. "Everything." He pushed himself up, his body feeling both strangely light and immensely powerful. He could still feel the hum of the ship's core, the flow of energy through its crystalline veins. It was a part of him now. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, a sound that was both audible and a feeling in his mind. Alert! Multiple warp space signatures detected. They have arrived. Kalen looked at Alara, his eyes now holding a depth and focus that hadn't been there before. The Reapers! On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, alarms blared, cocooned in rock. Their sensors were useless, but the proximity alerts wired to the Odyssey screamed to life. "Sir," Anya's voice crackled over the comm. "The Odyssey is showing 12 heavy cruisers and a carrier dropping out of jump space just outside the asteroid belt. They're hailing us on a black channel, demanding our surrender." Kalen was already moving, striding from the core chamber back toward his ship, Alara gliding silently beside him. "Tell them to stand by," he ordered, his voice ringing with a new, calm authority that made even Rostova pause. He reached the airlock and stepped back aboard his own vessel, the transition no longer jarring. The drifter felt like an extension of his own body now, its flaws and strength laid bare to his new senses. He walked onto his bridge, the crew turning to him, their faces pale with fear. "On screen," he said, "show me the Reapers." The main view screen, now fed by the Odyssey's senses, flickered to life. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. 12 ships, each one a blade of obsidian darkness, hung in the void. They were the opposite of the Odyssey in every way, stark, brutal, angular machines of war, bristling with weapon emplacements. They were designed for one purpose: intimidation and annihilation. They absorbed the light of the nearby star, making the space around them seem colder, deader. Leading them was a massive carrier, the Reaper's Scythe, its name emblazoned on its prow in blood-red lettering. A voice, cold and synthesized, crackled over their speakers. "Confederacy vessel Stardust Drifter, you are in violation of a direct order. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. You have 60 seconds to comply before we open fire." Kalen sat in his command chair, his hands resting on the armrests. He could feel the Reaper's weapon systems locking onto the asteroid, their targeting computers running frantic, useless scans against the living rock. He could feel the thrumming, patient power of the Odyssey all around him, waiting for his command. He was no longer just a man in a box, facing down a superior force. He was a mind in a living world, facing down a pack of wolves. "Anya," he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "Open a channel to the Reaper's scythe, all frequencies, unencrypted. Sir, do it." He leaned forward, his new eyes fixed on the Black Fleet. "Let's see how they react when the asset they came to collect decides to talk back." The channel crackled open, broadcasting on every frequency from encrypted military bands to open civilian channels. On the main view screen of the Reaper's scythe, Kalen's face appeared, not as a grainy, standard-issue comms image, but as a perfectly clear, high-definition projection. He was sitting calmly in his command chair, bathed in the soft light of his own bridge, looking not like a cornered mutineer, but like a man holding all the cards. The voice that came from him was his own, yet it resonated with a depth and timbre that seemed to fill the void, a calm authority that was utterly at odds with his rank. "Admiral Thorne," Kalen began, and on the bridge of the scythe, a ripple of shock went through the crew. He had used the Admiral's name without any formal introduction, a piece of information that should have been buried under layers of security. "I see you've brought the 7th Tactical Wing. I trust Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova has recovered from the plasma burn she sustained during the sieges of the Cygnus Arm. Please give her my regards." He paused, letting the impossibly specific and classified intelligence sink in. He wasn't just hailing them, he was demonstrating an omniscience that was deeply unsettling. "You are here under the mistaken impression that you are collecting an asset. You are not. You are trespassing in a place of sanctuary, and you are threatening the last hope for our species. This is your only warning. Power down your weapon systems, stand down your fleet, and prepare to receive a data packet that will explain the new terms of this war. Refuse, and I will be forced to disarm you." Aboard the Scythe, Admiral Thorne, a man whose face looked like it was carved from granite, stared at the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his command throne. Arrogance and fury warred in his eyes. This whelp, this nobody lieutenant, was not only defying him, but threatening him. "Lieutenant Vance!" Thorne's voice was a low, synthesized snarl, devoid of warmth or humanity. "You have committed high treason. You have consorted with an unknown Xeno entity and abandoned your post. You have 5 seconds to surrender your vessel and yourself before I turn that rock you're hiding in into radioactive dust." He raised a hand, ready to give the signal. 5, 4. A demonstration. Then, Kalen's voice echoed, tinged with a profound sadness. "So be it. Please observe the cruiser Retribution on your port flank." Admiral Thorne's head snapped to the tactical display. The Retribution, a brutal blade of a ship, hung menacingly in the void. As everyone watched, something impossible happened. The ship did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply changed. The massive energy cannons mounted along its dorsal spine began to shimmer, their dense, weaponized alloys dissolving like sugar in water. The molecules that made up the cannons, the power conduits, the targeting systems, unraveled. They flowed like shimmering mist away from the ship's hull, then coalesced and reformed into a new shape. Within seconds, where the cannons had been, there now stood a grove of crystalline trees. their branches catching the starlight and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The retribution was still there, its crew unharmed, its life support intact. But it was a warship no more. It had been neutered, its fangs turned into art. The bridge of the Scythe was utterly silent. The tactical officer was staring at his console, whispering, "It's not possible. It's just not possible." They had not detected a weapon discharge, no energy beam, no projectile. It had simply happened. It was not an act of war. It was an act of creation, a display of power so absolute and so alien that it defied their understanding of physics and warfare. Admiral Thorne, however, was a man forged in the fires of a losing war. He did not understand subtlety or nuance. He only understood force. To him, this was not a warning. It was an attack, a new form of weapon that he now coveted even more. His face purpled with rage. "All ships!" he roared, his voice cracking the stunned silence. "Target that asteroid, fire at will, annihilate them." The Reaper fleet, shaken but obedient, unleashed hell. 12 heavy cruisers and a battle carrier opened fire simultaneously. Lances of pure energy, torpedoes that warped space, kinetic slugs accelerated to near-light speed. A wave of incandescent destruction surged across the void, enough firepower to crack a small moon. But the wave never reached its target. As the torrent of energy and matter approached the asteroid, the space around it seemed to ripple. The Odyssey did not raise a shield. It simply asserted its reality over theirs. The energy beams were absorbed, drawn into the living rock as if it were a sponge, causing the asteroid to glow with a soft, internal light. The torpedoes were unmade in transit, their warheads rendered inert, their guidance systems dissolving into dust. The kinetic slugs were caught. Their immense momentum bled away to nothing, and they were left floating, harmless, like pebbles tossed into a pond. The most savage volley in the history of the Confederacy's Black Fleet had vanished without a sound, without a trace. Before Thorne could process this new impossibility, before he could order another futile attack, a new set of alarms screamed across his bridge. "Sir, multiple warp space signatures. They're massive, Visori." The universe seemed to tear open as a fleet of over 50 Visori bioships swarmed into the system. They were a nightmare of chitin and pulsing organic sacs, a tide of monstrous vessels drawn by the massive energy expenditure of the Reaper's volley. They ignored the asteroid, their hive mind seeing the Terran fleet as the more immediate and active threat. They opened fire, spitting globs of corrosive plasma and swarms of biomechanical fighters. The Reapers, caught completely by surprise, their guns still pointed at an invulnerable rock, were thrown into chaos. Plasma chewed through the unshielded hulls of 2 cruisers, their reactors going critical in silent, blossoming fireballs. The cold, orderly battle Thorne had envisioned had devolved into a desperate, swirling melee for survival. On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, Kalen closed his eyes. He wasn't watching the battle on the view screen. He was experiencing it from 1,000 different angles through the Odyssey's senses. He could feel the panic of the Reaper crews, the cold, singular hunger of the Visori hive mind. This was the moment. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his consciousness, merging fully with the will of the Odyssey. Now, Alara, now we sing. There was no sound, but there was a wave of pure information, of psychic energy, of life itself, that expanded from the Odyssey at the speed of thought. It was the counter-frequency, a song of individuality, of self, of chaos. For Kalen, It was like navigating a hurricane. He felt the overwhelming psychic presence of the Visori, a monolithic wall of shared purpose. He pushed against it, not with force, but with an idea. The idea of I. He was the pilot, guiding the virus of self-awareness into the heart of the storm. The effect on the Visori was instantaneous and catastrophic. All across their fleet, the psionic link that bound them together shattered. On the bridge of a Visori Leviathan, the 3-ton warrior caste creature that served as the ship's organic computer suddenly experienced a thought that was entirely its own for the first time in its existence. It was a terrifying, paralyzing sensation of being alone. Its ship, no longer receiving direction from the hive, began to list aimlessly. Fighter craft, suddenly piloted by individuals instead of a single will, lost their coordination. Some simply stopped, hovering in space. Others, gripped by a primal fear they had never known, turned and fired on their own brethren. The unstoppable tide of the Visori dissolved into a confused, terrified mob. Their greatest strength had become their ultimate undoing. They were no longer a collective. They were just a collection of frightened monsters, lost in the dark. The Reaper fleet ceased firing, their crews staring in stunned disbelief as their implacable enemy tore itself apart. Admiral Thorne stood on his bridge, his face slack with shock. The fury finally extinguished, replaced by a hollow, soul-crushing understanding. He had brought his swords and spears to a battle of gods, and he had been rendered utterly, humiliatingly irrelevant. Kalen's face appeared on his screen once more. He looked tired but serene, like a man who had just weathered a storm. The war, as you knew it, is over. Admiral, he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of history. Humanity has a new path now, a new way to fight, a new way to live. We are not an asset to be collected. We are the future. You have a choice. You can return to Earth and tell them what you have seen. Tell them to send their diplomats, their scientists, their dreamers. You can continue to see us as a threat. But know this, we will not be your weapon, and we will not be your enemy unless you force us to be. Kalen cut the connection. Inside the living asteroid, he stood up from his command chair and walked to the bridge's main view screen. The Odyssey was already at work. Crystalline tendrils extended from its surface, reaching out to the crippled Visori ships. Not to destroy them, but to contain them, to study them, to perhaps even communicate with the new, terrified individuals trapped within. The Reaper fleet hung in the distance, silent and still, their black ships looking small and obsolete. Kalen felt Anya's presence beside him. He turned to her, and she saw in his eyes the ghost of the man he had been, but also the vast, ancient wisdom of the Odyssey. "It's just the beginning, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yes," Kalen said, his gaze returning to the stars. For the first time in a century, it's a beginning. Humanity had been on the run, cowering in the dark for so long. But now, hidden in a dead system, a new light had been born, a living ship that had sung a song of change across the void. The Visori were broken. The old guard of the Confederacy was shattered. The future was a terrifying, beautiful, and unknown frontier. And he, Kalen Vance, the soldier who had only known how to fight, was now the pilot for that future, his hand on the helm of a living world, ready to guide his species back into the light.